Appalachia, a word that evokes a whole passel of reactions. Everything from beauty of a mountain top to trailer parks, drugs, and about everything in between. The Appalachian Mountains are indeed the oldest mountains in the world. They once towered 30,000 feet into the air. They stretch from eastern Canada through 14 states all the way to Louisiana. The folks who live in these mountains have faced an unending number of tragic and just plain odd happenings that cry out for the telling. Hello, I'm Larry Bentley, and I was born and raised in these very mountains by a family who themselves were born, raised, and lived for generations in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Come with me and we'll take a look at some of the unending stories that come from within my beloved mountains, and we'll take a look through the eyes of an Appalachian at some outside the area as well. Welcome to Season 5 of Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend. Howdy, my good friends. I hope you're doing well today. Thank you so much for stopping by. In the fall of 1882 in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, lived a man named Nicholas L. Dukes. Well, Mr. Dukes got to listening to so much gossip that he started thinking that his fiancée, Lizzie Nutt, had went out and had married folk type relations with another man or other men. Heck of it all was that took place before Lizzie and Mr. Dukes took a shine to one another and got all engaged up to be married. Now, we all know that none of that matters in today's world, but back in the Victorian age, that kind of stuff would get a woman marked as less than a desirable type of wife material. Now, of course, if a man did it, now he was considered to, be a bit of a scoundrel, but it wouldn't affect him in the long run at all. Yes, folks, things were, just about as bit one-sided as it gets. Now, we've all heard about back then, the honorable thing for a man to do in those days would have been to cuss and discuss the touchy subject with, between the two of them two. They were having a problem between them, and then just simply put a quiet end to their engagement in a face-to-face type situation. Mr. Dukes, well, he apparently was a mite worked up, and that somebody, in fact, several somebodies had rapped on the chamber door of the house he was planning to move in and be there for the rest of his life. And matter of fact, he got so mad that he decided to break off the engagement by writing a letter to Lizzie's father, who was a Civil War hero and now a cashier of the Pennsylvania State Treasury. Now, he was one Captain A.C. Nutt. Now, the results of that letter, of the one in question, was what one might call a violent feud. Feud featured a couple of murders, leading to a couple of trials, which is what it pretty much took to bring a little decorum back to Uniontown, Pennsylvania. So call your mom and them, and y'all have a sit down while I tell you all about how it went down. Who was Nicholas Dukes? Well, he was a prominent attorney about Uniontown, Pennsylvania area. Now, he'd just been elected to the Pennsylvania State Legislature when he'd first met or seen Lizzie Nutt in church and thought that she was, as he put it, the prettiest, nicest, most modest girl that he'd ever seen. Shortly after that, they were formally introduced at Ms. Nutt's request, because apparently she thought that he was the prettiest, nicest, most modest man that she'd ever seen. And over the next few months, he called on her quite often and had become quite infatuated with Captain Nutt's daughter. Now, right out of the gate, Mr. Dukes was about as jealous as the day was long over Lizzie. Now, let alone the fact that she would pay attention to other men, they'd speak to her, she'd speak back to them. And in yet another thing that would be troublesome back in the day. I reckon women were expected to be, keep their heads down and act like they belonged to somebody else or something back then. Every now and again, he'd even hear little bits of gossip that would set his mind to wondering just what Lizzie might be up to. Despite all that, he asked Lizzie to marry him, and she accepted. Now, the way Mr. Dukes told it was that he was still worried about Lizzie's reputation and went to see her to put her to the test and find out, for lack of a better term, whether or not she'd be wearing a white wedding dress or not when they got married. Now, when he got over to see her, he did what she did what she always did. She came up, sat on his lap. He said that that's when he turned up the heat and started, as he said, fondling on her, and as he put it, she melted like a candle in his arms. Then he made it what he called a solicitation to her. Now, nowadays, I believe they call that a proposition. Now, to his complete surprise, She accepted, and they went about getting right familiar with one another right there in the parlor. Now, it wasn't long before he found out that he wasn't the first man to knock on her door. He immediately confronted Lizzie about that, and according to him, she admitted to having previous relations with a man named Bogardus, a man named Fry, and a man named Kennedy. Mr. Dukes then decided to end the engagement, but as he put it, her monthly ailment didn't happen as scheduled, so he froze up as to what to do. He finally asked Lizzie to, well, just give me back the wedding ring, he said, because he was going to go replace it with a better one. And instead of breaking off the engagement to Lizzie's face, in early December, Mr. Dukes slinked off with the ring and sent a letter to Captain A.C. Nutt. He explained to Captain Nutt that his daughter was pretty blame promiscuous and was probably pregnant, and that was Victorian for calling Lizzie a hoe. Now, he made it clear that he was not Lizzie's seducer, like you do right after being Lizzie's seducer, with an underhanded intent in it, matter of fact. Then he pretty much said that abortion would be the best course of action for everybody involved. That's also Victorian for you need to get rid of that illegitimate child, or the name Nutt will mean a whole other thing. Now, Captain Nutt went to the post office the next day and grabbed the mail. He took it home to read while he smoked his pipe, had a small snifter of bourbon, and scratched his chin whiskers like he always did. Now, when he read the letter, Captain Nutt got so steamed that he blew a gasket and probably spit his Pappy Van Winkle all over his desk. First thing he did, being the captain of the U.S. Army and knowing how to chew on the hindquarters, was to call Lizzie into his office and so he could chew out around her rear end and let it fall out on the floor. And then when he got done with that, he was still hungry, and Mr. Duke's rear end was on the menu. He sat down and penned him a sweet little reply to Mr. Duke. The letter apparently said, or pretty much said, once you remove all the Victorian lingo, and I used the Appalachianometer on it to translate, it said, Mr. Dukes, you don't know who you're messing with. You talk to me like I'm afraid of you, boy. Only to tell me to have my grandbaby ended at the hands of a doctor. I'm fixing to show you what kind of iron I'm made of, son, and the community's gonna like it as much as I do. This can end in a decent way, or you can keep running that mouth and something bad's fixing to happen. It's up to you. As far as I'm concerned, the whole Commonwealth of Pennsylvania ain't big enough for us the way things stand now. Then Captain Nutt requested that Mr. Dukes drop by his house on December 23rd to finish the discussion face to face right before Santa Claus comes. And Mr. Dukes, since he wasn't smart enough to just let it go and go on with life, decided to poke the bear and sent another letter to Captain Nutt. This one said, after translation, I can't make a wife of a woman who's the toy of the town and the butt of the town jokes. I'd rather be dead. The whole community knows her better than you do. They can't even mention her name without a sneer. If you want to shoot somebody over it all, go shoot Fry, Bogardus, or Kennedy, or all three of them, along with all the rest of them, like there's more. But you just want your reputation smoothed over at my expense. He refused to meet Captain Nutt because he said that he would be walking into an ambush where he would be shot in the back by one of his cowards. He wanted Captain Nutt to come over and talk to him. Captain Nutt accepted, and on December 24th, 1882, he was accompanied by his nephew, F.C. Breckenridge, and Mr. James Feather, as he went to see Mr. Dukes at the Jennings Hotel in downtown Uniontown, where Mr. Dukes was living at the time. Now, the other men waited outside as Captain Nutt went to see Mr. Dukes alone. It wasn't long before they heard moaning, wailing, and great gnashing of teeth taking place from inside the room. Mr. Breckenridge and Mr. Feather rushed in and separated the two of them before somebody got hurt. Captain Nutt went over and rested against the mantelpiece to catch his breath, and when he did, Mr. Dukes pulled a revolver out of his overcoat and shot him, dropping him like a habit right there on the floor beside the Christmas tree. The only thing that was missing was for Mr. Dukes to tell him Merry Christmas as his lights went out, then step over and drag him away from a presence just to keep him from bleeding on him. When the police showed up, because back then, just like today, they tend to get involved in the middle of problems involving gunplay, Mr. Dukes just turned himself right in without a fight. What Mr. Dukes failed to comprehend was that Captain Adam Clark Nutt was a highly decorated war hero who served in the Civil War. He served with such bravery that he was promoted from buck private when he started out in 1861 to full-blown captain of a regiment before he ended in the war in 1865. After that, he served in several positions around Uniontown and was one of the most beloved citizens in the entire area. So as they dragged Mr. Dukes off to jail, mobs were already forming in the streets and talking about lynching the moron. Apparently, jail was about the only safe place in the whole area for the pipsqueak. On March 12, 1883, Mr. Duke's trial started, and with that, the killing of Captain Nutt became a national story, and naturally, crowds from all over the country rolled up in Uniontown for the festivities. And I use the term to the truest sense of the word, because back in the day there were few things that got folks' attention like a murder trial, especially one that involved a fine, upstanding war hero as the victim. More people would be on the streets literally than if there were bad company, ZZ Top and Leonard Skinner, all three putting on a free concert right there in front of the courthouse. There would be whiskey peddling, carnival games, food, gambling, and all kinds of drinks and some hard drinking going on. I reckon when you don't have radio, TV, internet, or anything else, you got to go with whatever's happening just to break up the monotony of life. During the trial, the prosecution said that the murder was premeditated and wanted a verdict of first-degree murder, complete with Mr. Dukes doing a hemp dance on top of it. Mr. Dukes said that he was involved in self-defense because he said that he didn't reach for his pistol till he saw Mr. Nutt reach for his. Mr. Nutt, being a battle-hardened expert marksman, when he reached for his, he figured he better pull his first and better be smoking when he did. Witnesses said that Captain Nutt was resting with his hand on his hip above his gun, not reaching for it for squat. But he also entered a motion to have the letters between himself and the good captain suppressed as evidence. He claimed that they were irrelevant in the case. The judge didn't see that and allowed them to be read in. And that's when the prosecutor stood right up in front of the court and read the letters in front of the good Lord and everybody else. The defense claimed that if you looked at it in the right light, why, the letters were an act of friendship toward Captain Nutt. I reckon he was just trying to warn his good friend about what was coming. Yeah, that's it. And then it went to the jury. The whole town couldn't wait for Mr. Dukes to be found guilty so they could step up the festivities for the hanging that would come next, because the next stretching party was even bigger than the trial party was. Just before 8 o'clock in the evening, on March 14th, the jury bell rang, and that meant that the jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed to the gills with folks hanging in the windows, crammed in upside to outside, trying to see inside, spilling into the streets. Now, you'd have thought that somebody showed a whole town full of Draculas to cross when the verdict of not guilty got read. Now, as you can imagine, the streets of Uniontown went completely ballistic with threats to lynch Mr. Dukes and the jury. Mr. Dukes decided to stay in the jail that night for his own safety and watch the crowd hang him in effigy outside his window, right there in the streets. As it turned out, and to properly ice the cake, Lizzie Nutt hadn't even been pregnant to start with. She denied every one of the allegations that Mr. Dukes made against her. Mr. Bogardus made a sworn affidavit saying that he hadn't even seen so much as a hair on Lizzie Nutt's head in 7 years and never had any such relations with her, and had no reason to believe her to be anything but a virtuous young lady. Two other men, the other two that were mentioned in Mr. Dukes' letters, put their John Hancocks on affidavits saying exactly the same thing. It later came out that Mr. Dukes had broke off 2 other engagements to 2 other women besides Lizzie. That certainly put a whole other outlook on things, didn't it? Sounds to me like Mr. Dukes was a regular holier-than-thou, better than you, and a walking insult to the good citizens of Uniontown, and was pretty much an unending air pipe of judgment of women living there, don't it? But telegrams started showing up at the Uniontown post office from elected officials and newspaper editors and concerned citizens wanting to know just how stupid the jury was to render a verdict like that. A committee of prominent Uniontown citizens was formed. They probably went over whether or not to have some kind of IQ testing for prospective jurors. to make sure that they have more than just enough brain stem to sustain vital signs. They wanted folks to be able to follow a train of thought, too. Apparently, that didn't go anywhere, so they issued a document of resolution condemning Mr. Dukes and the verdict. Nowadays, that would be meaningless, but back then it would ruin a man's reputation. I say that as if he hadn't already done enough to accomplish that on his own. Mr. Dukes was immediately disbarred and resigned from his seat in the state legislature because if he didn't, they were fixing to drag him off the back porch and expel him. After all that, Mr. Dukes had the good sense to leave Uniontown in embarrassment and start over somewhere else. Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? Nope. The hard head stayed right there in Uniontown, walking around just like nothing ever happened, crowing like a rooster, all while the whole town despised the ground he walked on. For a lawyer, the man wasn't nowhere near being the sharpest, or the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree. Let's put it that way. On the evening of June 13th, 1883, Mr. Dukes was strutting his way over to the post office. If I had to guess, probably to send another armload of insulting letters to some folks to check his mailbox for responses from the last stack he sent out. James Nutt, Lizzie's 19-year-old brother, watched the man who killed his father traipse by like a rutting buck, and it crawled his nape. He stepped out from a doorway behind Mr. Dukes and pumped 2 slugs in his back. Mr. Dukes probably stopped whistling his tune and took off running for his life. So James just popped him 3 more times. Mr. Dukes got to the top of the post office steps where his ghost leaped right out of his body, and he bit the top 2 before as he hit the floor. Policemen in the area no doubt heard what sounded like not far from the fall of Baghdad taking place over in Uniontown post office, and ran to the scene where they saw Mr. Dukes stretched out across the top step of the post office on his back, looking like a tater bug. It just flew into the window and was laying there flailing his legs. He probably started laughing just before he caught himself, stopped, and then arrested James Nutt, who was apparently holding a smoking gun with 5 discharged slugs in it. James didn't resist in any way. Policeman told him, "You've done a bad piece of work." James just said yes, but I couldn't help it. Come January 14th, 1884, the second murder trial festival, I guess you'd call it, in less than a year, fired up in Uniontown. This one was bigger than the first one because everybody in Uniontown was pretty much dancing around, celebrating like you saw happen in that old Christmas Carol movie when Scrooge goes into the future and sees the whole town dancing while they sling his casket out the door and it lands in a buggy with a man tap dancing on top of it. Most folks figured that James Nutt ought to be getting a medal for killing Nicholas Dukes. There were so many people in Uniontown who thought that James Nutt sliced a huge wart off the ass of society by killing Mr. Dukes that they couldn't seat a jury in Uniontown. So they had to move the trial to Pittsburgh. Well, if they thought that would help, what happened next should have snapped them back into reality. The festival was about 10 times worse there. Folks traveled from Uniontown and the surrounding area to Pittsburgh like they were following the Grateful Dead road show. Thousands of folks showed up, handing out pre-printed pamphlets giving the history of what was called the Dukes Nutt tragedy. Wood carvers sold woodcut illustrations of the whole story right out there in front of the courthouse, so many folks could see and even buy the whole thing right there on the way inside the courthouse. Poor judge had to yell at people to stop bringing bouquets of flowers and piling them up on the defense table. There were so many people there from Uniontown that I bet Uniontown looked like one of them old West ghost towns that you see in the movies during the trial. To beat it all, they managed to seat a jury and start trying Mr. Nutt. The prosecution argued that James Nutt did what was pure, all-day, outright premeditated murder. They said that Mr. Nutt had been seen target shooting with a pistol just before whacking the deviant, just to make sure that he wouldn't miss. Now, the defense was led by Daniel W. Voorhees, who just happened to be a sitting U.S. senator from Indiana. He apparently heard what happened and volunteered his services pro bono, and James Nutt pleaded not guilty by reason of emotional insanity. The courtroom was stuffed to the gills with folks watching like they were the audience on The Price is Right. They were so riveted by the proceedings that they listened to it all in complete silence. Senator Voorhees delivered his closing arguments saying that he'd advise any young man in James Nutt's circumstances to use a shotgun instead of a revolver next time. That's when the crowd cheered like somebody just won the showcase and Bob Barker was saying goodbye. Now, the closing statement was so good that the judge came down from the bench and thanked the senator with tears all welled up in his eyes. So the case went to the jury at 7:50 that night. Everybody in the courtroom thought that they'd have them a verdict before 8 o'clock, but they went on all night making folks feel like they were fixing to hang young Mr. Nutt. And the next morning, folks were still sitting and waiting when the jury came back with the verdict. The whole room full of folks stood there staring at like they just dared somebody to say the word hang, and the judge announced that the verdict was not guilty on account of insanity at the time of the act when it was committed. This time, not just Pittsburgh, but about every town and county in Pennsylvania went plumb ballistic like the Steelers had just won the Super Bowl, and they partied like it was 1999. James Nutt was held on for a day or so and examined by a team of know-it-alls to determine his present mental condition. Next day, apparently after they figured that insanity had sure enough packed its bags and moved out of James Nutt's head, he was released and probably had to have a drink with about every human being between Pittsburgh and Uniontown as he parted his way home. Now, 10 years later, James Nutt was dragged in all over again in Atchison County by the police there. Now, he had moved to Kansas where he was living on his farm and doing extremely well. This time, what happened was that he apparently had an exceptional good season and went out to celebrate and got him a tank full of bourbon. On his way home, he swung by Mr. and Mrs. Jesse Payton, who were his good friends and neighbors. They were good friends, and helped him, and he helped them, and they helped him on his farm. They helped each other. Mr. Payton was out, but a farmhand named Coleman was there to help James into the house, where Miss Payton fixed him a nice meal, all while holding her baby on her hip. James finished eating and thanked Mrs. Payton by drawing his 6-gun and shooting her in the back of the head, and as the report said, in the torso. Coleman, the farmhand, came to Miss Payton's aid as James was trying to attack her baby too. James shot him 3 times just as Miss Payton handed Coleman an axe. Yeah, you heard that right. The woman was still standing and still in the fight. Coleman used the blunt side of the axe to smash James over the head and tie him up, then rode off with 3 slugs in him to get help. Miss Payton later died. I reckon he figured that it worked so well the first time that once he got to trial, he tried the old insanity defense again. Sitting in his chair, rubbing poop in his head and wiping it all over the defense table and even in his hair and all. And everybody talking about everybody, but the garden gnome out back told him to drop the hammer on everybody in the house because they was home. Well, then he started eating the paper and the statements that was wrote on the table. And this time, didn't go well for him because everybody in the whole state was highly pissed at James Nutt. That rendered him a nice prison sentence of 10 years for his trouble. I reckon they didn't hang him because they thought he was pretty much slap nut caught in a torque wrench crazy. Now, he was real blame lucky because Kansas in 1897 would soon hang somebody to look at him over stuff like this. And, folks, that's the way it was when Nicholas Duke got him a nut. I hope you got something out of our podcast today. If you did, please rate and review the podcast. And if you watch it on YouTube, Rumble, or Spotify, throw us a like. And don't forget to subscribe or follow wherever you're listening or watching. Come on over to Appalachian Murder, Mystery, or Legend Podcasts on Facebook, where we talk Appalachian or about anything else you want to talk about. I'll be back real soon with another Appalachian Murder, Mystery, or Legend. And I will see you then.